I will never forget the day that my son's mother asked me to meet her out for dinner with our child, who was about 4 months old at the time. And in this conversation, she said one sentence that I'll never forget. What if we're not meant to be a family? And at the time, I had no idea what she was actually saying. It took that night and part of the next day before it processed and registered to me that she was ending our relationship. And when I realized what she was actually telling me that night, I remember having this vision in my head of this ship, this visual image of our relationship as an actual ship on the sea. And I remember just seeing all these wounds that were in it and just thinking, if this is what she wants to do, I will sink this fucking ship and make sure it can never come back up again. And I called her and I just laid into her with every single negative thing that I probably ever thought about her and told her exactly how I felt. Because at that time, the only way I knew how to process pain was through my anger and rage. And I had so much of it in me at that time. And I was driving when I made that call. And when I got home and I laid down and fell into about a 2-hour trip/meditation. And in that meditation, I asked one question. How the fuck did my life get here? And for the next 2 hours, I was basically taken through the process of how the hell my life got there. How I got into hell in my life. And it all started with just going back to, wasn't it your decision to pursue an attraction to somebody? Wasn't it your decision to enter into the relationship? Wasn't it your decision to have sex with this person? Wasn't it your decision, along with theirs, to have a child with this person? Wasn't it your decision to not deal with the things as they were rising up? Wasn't it your decision to ignore all these red flags that you saw? And when I got up from that, it wasn't some peaceful feeling that I got. I felt like God itself was guiding me and telling me exactly what happened. It was as close to a white light moment as one can have. But I didn't feel peaceful and blissful, and I didn't feel any of that. I was more numb and yet in pain at the same time. It was the worst feeling I'd ever had in my life. A couple months prior, I had a new son, a woman I loved in my life. Just a few short months after that, all of it came crashing down. And all of this was a direct result from a childhood trauma of being sexually assaulted that I knew nothing about until it surfaced months before my son's mother decided to leave. When I got up from that meditation, as I was walking from my bedroom towards the kitchen to grab a razor blade to just fucking kill myself and end it already, I'll never forget that feeling. It felt like something literally grabbed me and stopped me dead in my tracks. And it said, before you do anything, just pick up the phone and call your friend. Just pick up the phone and call someone. And I did. And that someone was the only thing that stopped me from continuing those next couple paces into that kitchen and slitting my wrists and ending my life with a 4-month-old child. For the next couple of months, I was just in the biggest fog of confusion and being lost and heartbroken and angry. Just so angry. How is it that something like that can happen to me as a child, and then as a result of it, the person that I love the most and is supposed to love me the most is abandoning me and betraying me and turning their back on me when I need them the most? Why are people allowed to get the fuck away with that? That's the only question that can be asked in the situation when it's in the moment. At least when you're first dealing with the fact that other people always have a choice to do whatever it is they want to do. And we completely take for granted that most of us, almost all the time, do what the other person would consider to be the right thing. But it's in those times when somebody does something that you consider to be the worst thing that they could ever do to you, and somehow the realization that the only thing you can do after railing against it in every way possible is you have to accept it. And I could not accept this. I couldn't accept this. I spent multiple months in therapy for the childhood sexual assault. And that was a process that was as life-changing as becoming a parent. I did psilocybin psychedelic therapies. And what we did is I took a set microdose 2 times a week for 3 weeks. And at the end of the 3rd week, I would do a 2-gram dose therapy session. And I did 3 of those rounds. So it was 3 weeks therapy session, 3 weeks microdose, full dose therapy session, 3 weeks microdose, full dose therapy session. The basic moral of what happened was every time I would go into the therapy sessions when I was put under, what the psychedelic did is it broke down my ego. And by my ego, I mean it broke down the character in which I have built up that I need the world to see in order to literally exist as a person amongst this world. It's what we all do. We all have these certain characters, roles we play at home, at work, socially, at a store, at a restaurant. We're constantly taking in from our external environment cues on how we're to act in order to keep this society moving, and yet we all have these behind closed doors versions of us. Things that don't necessarily agree with society, but when we're out in it, we play along and play the game just the same as everyone else. And so we have so much of the opinion of others as a part of our own self-creation. So in that sense, those things that I would never want people outside of the closed door version of me to ever see, the shame, the guilt, the remorse, the disgust, the resentment, the hatred, the simple fact of being a man who was sexually assaulted by another man as a child. There are so many things around that are just enough in the act itself to make one not want to ever have anyone else know this about me. But the gift that's given with the psychedelic is it breaks that ego down and it crushes those walls or opens the doors, whatever metaphor you want to use, but it gives a level of openness that I was able to go back and fully look at the trauma that had happened to me and actually literally visually see it and physically feel through the tripping aspect of it, physically feel like I was back there at that place and at that time. So by the 3rd session, what had happened is I was a 33-year-old man in my apartment doing a therapy session with this guide with me. As I go into the meditation and as the psychedelic begins to do what it does, we set the setting, and I had set my intention of exactly what I'm going to use the psychedelic to do. I'm going to use it to go back and remember and relive this trauma. And it was like I was 7 years old again. I was back in my house. I was running through the dining room, down the basement stairs, out underneath the deck across the patio, down through the yard, into the creek where we used to play. Now on the other side of that creek was our neighbor's house. And at that neighbor's house occasionally lived the man who had sexually assaulted me. Now I could literally remember seeing him up on the hill as I'm down in the creek playing by myself. I can remember him talking to me as he's slowly working his way down, and by the time he had made it down there and he made that move, it was the naivete of a child that small to not know what was happening as he was luring me in. And as I went through this whole process and I literally relived every single moment of it and physically felt it and remembered it, I literally would go into points where I I could remember, because the guide was reminding me on those points where he could see me tensing up and physically shaking and stiffening, and I would hear the guide's voice reminding me, you're 33, you're in your apartment, you're doing a therapy session, because I was that lost in the visualization and remembrance of what had happened to me that I feel like I could have gotten lost in there. But that guide voice was like a God voice to the 7-year-old as a reminder of, you're just remembering what happened. You're just remembering what happened. So that way your body can process this. It's been holding on to it for 27 years. It needs to get rid of it. We need to get rid of this. And I literally, after the whole thing was over, it was like a movie. I remember standing there as the 7-year-old kid, and I remember the whole scene just breaking apart into dust particles and just floating away. And then an actual God voice saying to that 7-year-old me left standing there in just white nothing, saying, you no longer have to carry this anymore. I will carry this for you now. You no longer have to carry the weight and the burden that this has caused for all these years. And in that moment, I began to come to. And I remember consciously coming to and realizing where I was, that I was 33, that I was in my apartment, but I couldn't move at all. I was completely catatonic. The experience from that much built up pressure over that long of a period of time finally releasing was such a shock to my system that I was catatonic for about 2 minutes and couldn't move after it was over. And then slowly but surely I could wiggle my toes and I could wiggle my fingers and then I could move my hands and my arms and eventually sit up. And that feeling when I sat up, light, weightless feeling when I sat up, I will never forget how amazing it was to know, because I felt it in every part of my body, that this shit was gone. This demon had been cast out. These spirits were gone. This tension and stress and pressure that had been building over years and years was just poof, gone.